but I'm delighted to be joined by the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland. Robert, you're aware, obviously, of this leak of this SAGE paper, which is looking at, as I say, infections running at a very high level all the way to the end of March, deaths at 500 a day for months, and therefore the aggregate of deaths significantly higher than in the first wave. There's no chance of a normal Christmas, is there?
Well, first of all, Robert, it would be wrong of me to comment about a leaked document, but I think it is right to talk about the nature of this second wave, second phase, whatever you like to call it.
Which has come earlier than the scientists expected.
And will last for a considerable period of time. I think that is a fair characterisation. I think all of us have a growing realisation that this is with us throughout the winter season. And, of course, the winter season will take us right through to when the clocks go forward again at the end of March. That's the climate we live in. That is, you know, how a respiratory disease really can take hold. And, of course, we have other risks as well, if we have a spike in influenza, other issues which we have to prepare for. But I'm glad to say that, for example, in the case of flu, we are going to have the largest immunisation programme in our history. And I think that we are in a position of knowledge now that we weren't in the spring. And that does give us more of an advantage, however serious the times in which we live.
More knowledge, but SAGE was looking at deaths of 85,000, you know, roughly double where they were in the first wave. And actually, one of the things that's been really worrying me, and I've been actually writing and broadcasting quite a lot about this, is that right now, deaths are higher than you would have expected, given the level of infections 2 or 3 weeks ago, and given the lag between infections and death. So this is pretty serious. Just to get back to the specific thing I was asking, I mean, there is people want to be told there's hope for Christmas, but I don't think there is much, is there?
Well, I think we've all got to be realistic that if we are seeing these trends continuing right through December, then Christmas in its perhaps fullest sense won't be achievable for any of us this year. And perhaps coming to terms with that now is probably the right approach that we need to take. It doesn't mean that we can't have Christmas, but perhaps those extended gatherings which, you know, draw people from different parts of the country. When I've got family in Wales, for example, that may well not be possible given the information that is emerging.
If you look at the statement that President Macron made tonight, one of the reasons he has gone for a national lockdown, pretty severe one, is he said that he was hoping that test and trace meant that actually life could continue more normally, and test and trace has failed in France. Now, many would say test and trace has failed in the UK too. So it's presumably on that basis only a matter of time before we have a national lockdown in England.
Well, France's infection rates are double ours at the moment. However, it would be wrong of us to ignore what's going on in other European countries. I don't think test and trace has failed. 1.1 million people having been traced that we wouldn't have known about otherwise is a significant achievement. We now have over 100 groups working locally, and that, of course, is going to be expanded further. And I think we've just got to keep the pace up on that.
But the thing that everybody hoped it would do,
about where the disease is.
The thing that everybody hoped it would do, it has, I mean, conspicuously failed to do, which is it was supposed to identify who the super spreaders were, where the sort of places of maximum risk were, so you could sort of nip in, lock them down quickly, and that hasn't really happened, not in any scale. Well, we wouldn't have the Northwest if it worked.
Yeah, but I think that the very fact that we are seeing now these regional differences or these local differences is evidence of the fact that we do know more about this disease. And as Gavin was saying, you know, the localised approaches, tier 3 or plus, those extra local measures that can be taken are absolutely the right approach to take. We're moving swiftly on those. Another area tonight, Nottinghamshire, will be in that list. You know, we are taking this localised approach, which I think reflects the reality across England in particular, where you have dramatic differences between, let's say, parts of the rural southwest and then those problems that we see in the northwest.
But you've just pointed to Nottinghamshire. Initially, the hope was you'd only have to lock down Nottingham, but now it's going to be the entire county.
Well, because the evidence points to quite a high rate of infections per 100,000 people. That, of course, leads to more hospital admissions. That local information is invaluable in order for us to take a more calibrated approach to this, rather than just opting for the so-called circuit breaker, which in my view only delays the issue, doesn't actually deal with it. I think the real point here is whether or not there would be a need for a full national lockdown. As the PM has always said, he can't rule anything out, and using that brake and pulling the handbrake, if you like, is something the government is always prepared to do. Let us hope that we don't have to do that. But I do think that we're in this for the long haul, Robert.
But on that point, I mean, we have looked at Germany. I mean, rather jealous of the fact that, both the number of infections and the number of deaths in Germany has been significantly lower than here. They are locking down the whole country tonight on the basis of a much lower rate, or much less infection than we have here. Surely we should look at Germany and say, well, we've got to copy them.
Well, I don't think any country in Europe should be blindly copying each other, because we all have different factors, different demographics, different experiences. As I've said, we've got to examine very carefully what our friends are doing. And I think that already, in large measure, we are doing very similar things with the approaches that we're taking, particularly in England, with the tiered approach and the calibrated, targeted measures that we're taking.
Now, there's tons more I want to pick up on all of this and other stuff as well. But first, actually, Anushka, you've got, I think, some interesting information for us.
Yeah, there's another story we've been thinking about this week, and it's around children and hunger, and a petition to extend free school meals beyond term time after the government refused to do it this week has now gone over 1 million signatories, and it is rising fast. So let me just look at something to do with the costs of the policy. We've got some interesting analysis from the Institute for Fiscal Studies today. Look, this bar shows how much it costs to provide free school meals in term time around the year. This shows how much it would cost to extend it to all the holidays for a full year. And this is what Marcus Rashford was calling for, which was to carry it on up to Easter while COVID restrictions are still in place. Now, just to put that in context, that is £85 million, and it is 0.05% of the total amount being spent by the government on the COVID response overall, one bit of which I just want to put next to it. That was 1 month of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, much more expensive than either of those measures. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. I mean, just on that, I mean, a half a day of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme would pay for, 1.5 million kids on free school meals. Why doesn't the government, I mean, almost everyone in the country, apparently from, Boris Johnson and the Cabinet, wants these free school meals to be provided. Why aren't you doing it?
Well, because we're looking at the picture in a much bigger way. It's not just about free school meals and holidays. There are other issues here that we've been looking at actually well before the COVID crisis. And Henry Dimbleby's work, of course, was commissioned by the government back in 2019. He's already issued the first part of his report back in July. There are important measures in there that cover not just free school meals and eligibility, but also activity and food.
But he's very clear that quite a lot of what the government is currently doing can't, you can give the money to parents, but you can't guarantee that kids will eat. I mean, he is backing Rashford.
Well, look, we already have, of course, took huge action in the summer to create the biggest voucher scheme that we've ever seen, and the amount of money. But well, I think that it's easy to come up with a glib answer to this. I mean, I think everybody has the right intention here, and frankly, for all of us to sort of bicker in a party political way and criticise each other doesn't help the situation. I pay tribute to everybody, Marcus Rashford, everybody who's got involved, because their intentions are absolutely the right ones. The key here, for me, the devil here is in the detail. We've got to make sure that the response that we make is as one that can be sustained, so that we don't end up in another position where we have a cliff edge and families are in trouble, which is why I think the fundamental issues here about universal credit, about all the other help that we're giving to families, are being ignored in this argument. The government has made unprecedented steps here to help the very poorest in our society. I don't think people are ignoring
universal credit, but I think people are saying that's not the right way to help this group. And, you, I think of yourself as a one-nation Tory. Boris Johnson, when he got elected, said he was a one-nation Prime Minister. to go back to COVID, the data shows that these people who are dying are the poorest, least advantaged people in the country. In fact, there is a greater correlation than there was in the first wave now of people in intensive care from the most deprived groups in society. I mean, that is a terrible indictment of the inequalities, and some would say the government is simply not doing enough to reverse them. I mean, that's why all those MPs were writing the Prime Minister the other day from the north of England, Tory MPs, saying, you're ignoring us at your peril.
That's another issue generally about the levelling up agenda and the natural anxiety of colleagues to make sure that we're able to follow that through, despite the huge challenges of COVID. When you look at what this government has done as a result of the COVID crisis, we have taken an unprecedented step in really scaling up public spending in a way that none of us could have envisaged only 8 or 9 months ago. And I look at the amounts of money that are being spent, quite rightly, to help the poorest in our society. It's a record of which we should speak about proudly. Yes, there is more that we can do, which is why we're looking very carefully at what Henry Dimbleby and others have said. This isn't a government that's closing its ears. We are listening carefully, and we will act in a way that can create a sustained approach here that really makes a difference to the very poorest in our society, who we care about just as much as everybody else.